Unsolved murders to this day where, people thought that maybe they were being haunted, or were there people living in their home with them.
This is a really interesting kind of hybrid adaptation. It started as a super successful podcast, and so bringing that into television, you always kind of have to figure it out. So from season 1's perspective, what were some of the things that you loved and that you knew you wanted to bring into season 2? And then Sean, as a new showrunner, some of the things that you loved and that also wanted to put your own stamp on.
I think the great thing about the podcast is that it tells the most frightening stories because these are all true. They happen to real people. So we obviously wanted to preserve that. But we found that by breaking the narrative storytelling, because these are about people, real things, terrifying things that happen to people. Every time we broke away for sort of a documentary pod, it distanced you from the primary story.
Yeah.
So we wanted to change it up this time and really focus on those characters, and people can always go to the podcast to fill out those stories.
And Sean, what was the thing that you loved, and then some of the things that you wanted to kind of change out for season 2?
That was it. I mean, as a huge fan of the podcast, I love when I listen to the podcast when it gets into the smaller stories, it gets very emotional for me. And that's what I felt we needed to do on the show. Rather than try to do an entire history of Transylvania and then talk about how this Countess Bathory bathed in the blood of virgins, we just tell one story. Basically, the last 3 days of her reign sort of is our story this season. So we're trying to tell a very structured, simple narrative story for like 40 minutes. So it should feel more, as opposed to last season, this season should feel more like Black Mirror. But what's different than Black Mirror is that this is obviously, as you said, true stories.
Right.
So the horror that you're actually watching on screen happened in some fashion.
And that's such a great trend right now, and that people are really, really drawn to the real aspect, the true crime kind of stories, and then we have the kind of true horror kind of stories.
Absolutely, and that's what is so fascinating, is that these are the basis of a lot of folklore. So this season we deal with curses, and we deal with witches, and we deal with, probably the greatest, if that is the right term, female mass murderer of all time.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's in the Guinness Book of World Records.
Really? What was your kind of benchmark for inspiration for this year's episode?
Yeah, I wanted to use 60-30.
Okay.
Or 60-40, 66-33. I wanted to use 4 podcasts and then 2 new ones that could be podcasts or will become podcasts, perhaps.
Yeah.
That was where we wanted to go, because we love the podcast, but we also wanted to tell this story that hasn't been told yet, because he's only told 100 so far.
Right.
He'll probably end up telling 1,000, and all of these will be told. And so that was really exciting to me, is to go outside and pick 2 other things and try to fit it into how the podcast tells the story.
What's been exciting for you this year to either push boundaries or to kind of introduce some new things? Well,
this season we relocated from Atlanta, Georgia, to Prague in the Czech Republic.
Oh, yeah, that's
which it gives us an entirely different look, an entirely different scope. We're able to do so much more and tell even more compelling and bigger stories. It really feels epic this time, but at the center are always these characters, these real people that these things happen to.
And like you point out, though, we, in the documentary aspect, that hybrid aspect, we wanted to take it differently this year. We want to do it differently, where it really feels integrated into the story. You don't feel like you're pulling out for a documentary piece, or you should be, like we have one episode where it's a Punch and Judy show, and we just have our main characters interact with and the Punch and Judy show gives us some of the history of grave robbing all the time.
And it is true to the period.
Right. Yeah, it's a great framing device for that. That's so great.
So really integrated into the episodes, where you should never feel, again, it's that Black Mirror Twilight Zone. You should feel you're in the episode the whole time.
Oh, that's
all
exciting.
the way through.
So when's our drop date for the season 2?
We are going to be airing in October.
Ah, great.
We're going to be airing in time for Halloween.
Oh, perfect. That's wonderful.
We're so excited because we tell stories, from the Prague clock.
Oh, cool.
So it's the mythology behind the curse of the Prague clock. And we were shooting in Prague, so that was a great way to step outside of some of the lore podcast and tell something different.